I want you to try to imagine three utterly different scenes. The first one, yellow sand and crumbling, blistered, peeling limestone, warped and twisted rocks, hills like dust heaps, a bare and jagged landscape, glowing and shimmering in the heat like some vast furnace. Then imagine a group of excited people who've discovered something momentous concerning their leader and friend, a discovery that makes life glitter with a sense of fulfillment and purpose. And finally, a quiet garden in the silent hours of a calm, sultry spring night. In the garden there are 4 men, 3 of whom are dozing under the trees. What have these 3 scenes in common? They are all places where Jesus was tempted. The first scene is a description of the wilderness overlooking the Dead Sea. It was so forbidding it was known as the devastation. The second is the busy countryside around Caesarea Philippi, at a time when the air was filled with exciting rumours of a new national leader. The last scene is Gethsemane. Each place is a backcloth to Jesus' agonizing struggle with temptation. In the wilderness, confronting the devil, the personification of evil. At Caesarea Philippi, resisting the misguided wishes of his followers. In Gethsemane, wrestling with his own fear and despair. I suppose most of us have sometimes fallen into the trap of believing that if only we could change our circumstances, all our thwarted desires after God and goodness would suddenly disappear. Do you ever try to convince yourself that the temptations that beset you are not connected to your real character, but the result of the circumstances in which you find yourself? Have you never moaned with the psalmist, "Oh, that I had wings like a dove, then would I fly away and be at rest"? Or have you said, "If only I could go on retreat, join a religious order, have a long holiday, win the lottery, I'd be a different and a better person"? But it doesn't work like that, does it? If the experience of Jesus is anything to go by, all places and all circumstances can be scenes of confrontation, of being tudged between good and evil, of facing the trauma of choosing between the best and the second best. The temptations Jesus faced are as varied as their locations. In the wilderness, he faced doubt as to the reality of his spiritual experience and the validity of his vocation. "If you are the Son of God," the words he heard at his baptism must have still been ringing in his ears. "You are my beloved Son." Now he hears, "If you are." It's a temptation to doubt his calling. Did I really hear that voice? Am I really the Son of God? Or was it all in my imagination? And then he is tempted to achieve his Father's purpose by other than his Father's way, to turn stones into bread, to place his own needs first, and maybe win the support of the crowd, as Caesar with his bread and circuses did in Rome, or to rule like Caesar with an iron hand over the nations of the earth, to perform spectacular miracles which would amaze and capture the allegiance of multitudes. And then there's Caesarea Philippi, where Peter realized Jesus was the Messiah, God's anointed one. Yet he completely misunderstood how this would work out in reality. How tempting it must have been to please his friends, for Jesus to fit himself into their conception of him. Instead, he chooses to be as harsh with his closest followers as he might have been with his greatest enemy. "Get thee behind me, Satan." And then there is Gethsemane. Here Jesus wrestles with his own terror of the death he was to face on the morrow. How tempting it must have been to run away to safety and to life under cover of darkness, or to call upon the legion of angels waiting to assist him. The places of temptation and the forms of temptation were for Jesus many and various. And so they will be for us. Our Lord was tempted, not at the place of his weakness, but of his greatest strength. Temptation occurs not just in the glittering, secular, distracting places of this world, but also in its most sacred places and at its most sacred moments. If Jesus' experience is anything to go by, temptation will come to us when we are most confident in our faith and in our holiest frames of mind. We cannot escape temptation any more than Jesus could. It is woven into the warp and woof of our humanity, as the ancient story of Adam and Eve and the serpent dramatically shows. Why? Why are we human beings exposed to this appalling pressure? Well, first of all, because we live in what the Bible describes as a fallen world, and we are members of a fallen humanity, flawed beings who fall short of what God intended us to be. But in the New Testament, temptation has rather the meaning of testing. One commentator likens it to the stretching and straining of a person, just as a sample of metal is stressed in order to discover the loads it will be able to bear. Temptation reveals me to myself, a hard, disillusioning experience, but an invaluable one. And temptation drives me to my knees. A lesson we all have to learn is that we cannot deliver ourselves. We need God's grace to resist. I once read of a biologist who came across a butterfly struggling to break from its chrysalis. He took pity on the poor, weak creature, and with his penknife gently eased its exit. But to his dismay, the insect's wings failed to expand. It never took to the air, and it soon perished. The struggle to emerge from its chrysalis was an essential part of its development. So neither does God deliver us from temptation by sending an angel to transport us to a safer place. A great and holy priest writes that God makes us make ourselves. He allows us to enter situations where we are forced to struggle, to agonize, to use all our energy to break out of imprisoning circumstances, to discover resources we never dreamed we possessed. And all this in order that, like the butterfly, we might stretch our wings and learn to fly.